knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed. A few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
We think the Houthi Ansarullah is doing what Houthi fucking bloodthirsty, violent pig dogs. Why am I held accountable? God forbid you throw up the fucking green Hamas banner.
Happy birthday to you.
I'm cooked.
Happy birthday from Twitch, Hasan. Happy birthday from Twitch.
So far, so good. Prologue. Why am I making this?
Oh, hi there.
That's me. He's watching me play Marvel Rivals in the background. Okay,
me,
cool.
your old friend, Ethan Klein. It's been a while since we've last spoken. In that time, I've had 3 kids, all boys. I've lost 100 pounds, and I've pissed off 75% of the internet. Probably a lot of you guys too. Actually talking about there at the NRA meeting that's today in Texas. Someone should bomb. Oh yeah, and I got a tattoo also, so I'm cool like that now. Left or right, I always thought that despite our differences, there was one thing we could all agree on. And what was that? That we love America and everything she stands for.
Mom and Dad and apple pie.
Sure, there's plenty to criticize and endless things to improve, but I thought it was about making a more perfect union, not tearing it down.
And marching bands, a pride that only
The thing is, there's something kind of scary brewing in America. Communism.
That's America. That's America to me.
I started a show a couple of years ago with my acquaintance, Hasan Piker. You might remember him from...
Yeah, by the way, I do want to point out something here. This is January 31st, 2025 was when this video was released. January 31st, 2025. Yeah, I disliked it. I ripped it. I ripped it already. Got to do it. Got to do it for the one time. There was something brewing in the United States of America at that point. Do you want to know why I say this? I point out the date. Because the thing that was brewing in America was not communism. I know he's trying to make a joke, right? He's, I think, trying to make a joke. But we were already deep into the insanity of the Donald Trump Burger Reich administration. At this point, I was in Japan, escaping the fascist administration rising to power. But at this point, it had been 11 days since Elon Musk had dropped the Sig Heil twice at inauguration. Okay? We're 11 days into Donald Trump. And the reason why I point this out is because I suspect, regardless of the fact that I didn't watch the context Nuke, but I am very familiar with Ethan's commentary on the matter. The reason why I mention this is because Ethan has a lot of issues with figuring out his priorities, because a lot of what Ethan talks about in this video are values that he cares about, values that he wants to defend. Like, he's a fighter against anti-Semitism. He's a fighter against like right-wing attitudes and things like that. He's a fighter against extremism on all sides. And yet, it feels like what he chooses to spend his time on betrays that idea. betrays that value, that first principle that he's operating off of. Because if you're freaking out about anti-Semitism on the rise, I would assume that you probably wouldn't make an entire video and use your previously unused platform to attack your former podcast co-host who you knew was not an anti-Semite, and you, I think, still know is not an anti-Semite, but sometimes you go back and forth on it. And I know his response always is he can care about two things at once. Yes, but the thing that he's caring about is bullshit. And I think my response to this is going to explain to you exactly why the thing that he ostensibly cares about with respect to me, okay, or all the other people that he brings up in this context, Nuke, is ridiculous. Especially because whenever Ethan says, I can care about two things at once, well, he certainly doesn't talk about the other thing that he's supposed to care about. If Ethan says, I care about the genocide, for example, and then spends every waking moment talking about those who speak out against said genocide, then it's kind of hard for people to go along with this ridiculous narrative that he actually cares about the genocide.
Such classics as
America deserved 9/11, dude. Fuck it. I'm saying it. Yeah, kill them. Kill those motherfuckers in a video game. Sorry. Holy shit.
That's not what I said, you dumb cracker bitch.
and of course, the Leftovers podcast, which was our show, which we made broadly to goof on the antics of the right. Now, to be clear, I knew about all these edgy and controversial jokes at the time we made the show together, because who am I to judge?
There is Ethan Klein being a delightful human being.
I was just going to say, if there's another Holocaust, if they start rounding up the Jews again, I hope Ben gets...
Okay, the Seinfeld references are stale, man. But that's an aesthetic note.
He presents himself as someone like me, a left-leaning Democrat who supports basic things. And we went on making the show.
Okay, right off the rip, let me get started by saying I have failed. I'm a failure. The reason why I have failed is because the Leftovers podcast was supposed to be a podcast where this man, who I thought at the time was an open-minded, empathetic, kind person, who was interested in learning, was on his own journey of learning, was supposed to be the goofs and gaffs guy, and I was supposed to be the guy that gives them, the meat and the bones. I was supposed to be the information guy. He's the goofs and gaffs guy. We clown on the right, and we educate the audience as Ethan himself is getting educated by politics. But it seems like I failed on that educational aspect, considering that his analysis right off the rip is, well, he's a left-leaning Democrat who supports basic things. What does this mean?
What
does this mean?
Supports basic things. And
left-leaning Democrat who supports basic things? Okay.
We went on making the show for about 2 years, and everything was good. Everyone was having fun. The audience was having fun. No problem. That was until this happened.
We were doing our regular show, and for the first time I noticed an inordinate amount of radical, hardcore leftists. I mean, I thought we were social democrats, not whatever this was.
Ethan Klein did not know what social democrats are or what that represents, by the way, before Leftovers. And I suspect he might still not know what being a social democrat is, even at this point. But let's continue.
I don't hate the idea of like people who can be successful. I think it's good that people can achieve success in the term monetary success. I mean, that's what that means, right? I do. There's nothing.
I am not a hater of success. I myself am financially very successful. One of the largest points of contention with my existence from many right-wingers is that, you're a socialist, but you have money. How does that happen? So clearly, I don't take issue with that. There is no disagreement there.
Wrong with that?
Because I see so many people in the chat saying no.
I don't know what y'all are tripping about. Like, what the fuck do you want?
What is the idea that you guys are looking for?
You guys are all like radical communists? There's that many radical communists? Suck it, chat. You're watching a capitalist pig. Deal with it.
And then this happened.
This comment from Hasan really started to sound some alarms in my head.
If you're in a socialist country with multiple parties, and one of the parties is a capitalist party, which would surely exist, what would you do if that party started gaining momentum?
The solution to that would always be education and offering more...
Re-education?
Re-education, certainly, yeah. There should be an enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, education. Here, I'll give you an example. What to do with the right-wing charlatans who are anti-vaxxers and unimaginably racist. I am a firm and committed believer in rehabilitation. And because I am a firm and committed believer in rehabilitation, I believe everyone can be rehabilitated, including right-wing reactionaries. So if you can understand that from the perspective of like getting your parents who are brain broken by insane right-wing sentiment coming back to reality through the process of education, then you can understand exactly what I'm talking about. The problem is this is red baiting to be like, ooh, this is red terror. He wants to do re-education. Now, of course, many of the conversations that we had as friends and podcast co-hosts at this point are now being utilized in a nefarious way to say, ooh, he really scared me with this one. Let's take a look.
And in that enforcement mechanism, I think like rehabilitation, which would include re-education as well.
If putting capitalists in re-education camps isn't disturbing enough,
This is, again, very scary. It does not mean, he said capitalists on horribly racist. No, my point is you can understand the importance of education in that regard, right? Because a capitalist is not going to gain incredible amounts of momentum, but a capitalist might actually do crimes in the process. And if that happens, then yes, education and rehabilitation is absolutely a necessity. It is a far more preferable outcome than actually throwing someone into, as Ethan Klein claims here, camps. I never said camps. He said camps. Notice how he's guiding the conversation in the aftermath without me being able to respond to lead you to believe that I want concentration camps.
Started to note if putting capitalists in re-education camps isn't disturbing enough, I started to notice that Hasan was carrying a lot of water for communist states' war crimes and genocides.
What do you call Crimea? I call it a part of Russian territory, bitch. That's what I call Crimea. I call it Crimea River, a Russian river. The annex.
Is he going to respond to the actual full context here? I suspect not. Is he going to actually broach the subject matter even a little bit? Probably not. Let's see. Let's see what else he puts here.
Is absolutely a justifiable annexation. Tibet was literally a fucking feudal.
Okay. Nope. Just moving on. Got it. Okay. Russian communism is hilarious. Russia, as I have maintained over and over again, is an irredentist kleptocracy. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is unjustifiable. There are a million different moments where I have described this process. I have fundraised for Ukrainian refugees to the tune of $200,000 after the invasion of Ukraine. I do not believe that Russia is a communist country at all. It is an authoritarian kleptocracy. Why is he presenting this? Why is he presenting this information as though I believe Russia is actually in the right here? There is a difference that I have maintained over and over again. Russia's annexation of Crimea. Russia has a profoundly important military base in Sevastopol that it actually had a loanership agreement over with Ukraine even before it actually overtook Crimea. But there's a difference between the annexation of Crimea and what took place in the aftermath of said annexation of Crimea versus what Russia is doing in Ukraine right now. Okay? As far as my stance on this, there is no defense of there's no defense of Russia taking any additional land, okay? This is a ridiculous act. And I have maintained the position that Crimea, throughout its historical process under the USSR, even before then, has been Russified. This is precisely the reason why Western polls, not even like the Russian annexation and the subsequent quote unquote democratic process that took place, but the pre-Russian annexation before Russia's military incursions in eastern Ukraine as well, people that lived in Crimea were rather sympathetic to Russia already. This is part of the reason why Russian annexation of Crimea, while still unjustifiable under international rights and international humanitarian law, was done without a single shot being fired in the process. That's why I always separate Crimea and the annexation of Crimea as opposed to the completely ridiculous and incredibly violent invasion of Ukraine. In the aftermath of the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine shut off the waterways into Crimea by damming the waterways that were designed under the USSR into Crimea, making Crimea even reliant on making Crimea basically reliant on Russia. If this in and of itself, beyond the unjustifiable land extraction, land annexation, outside of the fact that the land annexation is still unjustifiable, if there was an opportunity for Ukraine to be able to salvage Crimea, it would have taken place already. Okay? I don't know why people still try to I don't know why people still try to relitigate this process when Donald Trump has already offered Crimea with a legalized annexation to Russia. Now, as far as Tibet,
slave mandate, like
So
autonomous zone.
China did them a favor.
That was one. I mean, in America, when I say something like this, people get very upset. You know, we talk about the Dalai Lama saying "suck my tongue" or whatever, but like that's not far from the norm in fucking normal Tibetan existence before the Communist Party came in and
so China
unilaterally
took over Tibet,
like these are
their culture. They basically are trying to, you know.
No one is culture is slavery. I don't know why. Like he brought up culture. There is no slavery culture here. From a Western perspective, this immediately rings alarm bells. Where it's like, well, you're making the British Empire had to permanently occupy India because they all have had a barbaric culture or whatever, or that the United States of America had to tame the savages. That is not the argument here at all. Okay? That is not my argument at all. And while there are issues with the continued sovereignty over Tibet that China has had, Tibet being a part of the Chinese empire in perpetuity and having some semblance of autonomy throughout even the nationalist process, and certainly under Mao as well, has been the same thing since the fucking 19th century. It was the Tibetans themselves that wanted to rise up against the feudal land ownership. It wasn't simply just Chinese annexation and occupation. It was actually an abolition of serfdom in Tibet. This is no different than other Han Chinese areas that were previously occupied by the nationalist forces, where once the Maoist forces took over, a lot of the peasant class that was under the rulership and even fought alongside the nationalist forces defected. The reason as to why they defected was because they wanted to restructure Chinese society completely. Because when faced with these two options of working with Mao, working alongside Mao, and rewriting the rules of Chinese land ownership, they, of course, chose a universalized land ownership structure rather than going back to the nationalist-dominated previous landlord ruling over the peasant class structure that they existed under. It is not different. What happened in Tibet is also not different. What happened afterwards is, that is a certainty, because Tibetans still, as far as I understand, maintain a lot of love and a lot of support for the existing Dalai Lama, regardless of the fact that the CIA actually used that to their advantage, gave a lot of money to the Dalai Lama. It doesn't matter. Tibetans like the Dalai Lama. That's it. Okay? And there are contemporary issues in Tibet right now as far as Tibetan sovereignty, Tibetan culture, and these are still significant problems. But if we're talking about the way that the Chinese annexation of Tibet took place, it's not the same as China coming in and taming the barbaric Tibetans. Tibetan serfs did not want to be serfs. They did not want to continue existing within the peasant structure where they were being dominated by landlords, their landowners.
Homogenize the culture.
If your culture,
they're trying to spoil the religion and the identity.
The part of feudal warlords and slavery, abolishing that, yes, I do think that is good.
No, China did them a favor.
This is a good way to describe Taiwan as well. The American federal government going into the fucking South and killing, unfortunately not all of them, but a decent amount of slavers and defenders of slavery. This is violent retribution from a powerful federal government that squashed, okay?
Tibet is the South in the Civil War?
Yes. Yes. The previous serfdom structure, and it's not Tibetan culture. I think it's like ridiculous to say. It's like, I think this is akin to saying like black people in the South, it's just a part of their culture to be enslaved. That's not the case. Okay? That's not the case at all. The reason why I try to use this analogy here is because it was initially an action of resistance against the feudal serfdom structure in Tibet.
Yes.
And most disturbingly, a complete whitewashing of the Chinese genocide against their Muslim minority group, the Uyghurs.
Don't they have Uyghur death camps? Is that?
It's not a death camp. They were re-education camps, and they are no longer in operation.
Is that
according
true?
to the Associated Press?
Okay.
Everything I said here is correct. I don't know why he put this in the video. I assume he's not going to make an argument against this, and instead simply claim that it's a genocide that took place and he's hiding it or something. I don't know. Let's see.
I saw this crazy documentary, and I don't know. I don't know the surrounding narrative or anything about it, but it was about there was doctors in the area. They would be able to procure organs.
No, no.
I'm telling you, they were in China with
that one is like Shen Yun.
Okay, so he saw a documentary this was the conversation that took place. I don't even remember the full details, but he's saying that he watched a documentary. I immediately suspected it's probably like a Falun Gong documentary. Falun Gong is a right-wing anti-Communist Party of China cult that's anti-miscegenation. They're the ones who also own Shen Yun and Epoch Times and numerous other media outlets that are super far right, and they work alongside the CIA. Having said that, this does not mean that there is no repression in Xinjiang. Of course, there is major repression in Xinjiang. There was a lot more major repression in Xinjiang, especially a couple years ago. For those of you who don't know, there is an East Turkestan separation movement in Xinjiang. Okay? Some of the Uyghur Muslims, many of them also trained by the CIA, some of them are in Syria right now, wanted to separate from China, mainland China. In the process of enacting their separatist goals, there was a lot of knife crime, a lot of terror, and the Chinese government, in my opinion, completely, in the most ridiculous ways possible, enacted an unimaginably cruel regime of surveillance and also cultural erasure and also concentration camps, but re-education camps, where they claimed that these were simply vocational retraining schools, worked to actively, and ruthlessly re-educate the Uyghur Muslims. Okay? They bullied an entire population into submission. There was mass surveillance that took place. And also, I have never said that this was acceptable. I've never considered this to be appropriate. I am always critical of this. This is something that a lot of people get mad at me over, because they say, where did you learn all that? Did you watch a documentary too? They'll say Adrian Zen's propaganda. It is still completely unacceptable. It's ridiculous. What I'm doing here against Ethan is recognizing the truth of the matter. So let's take a look.
So like we can get you an organ from a Uyghur. But why is that? Is that really that crazy?
The Associated Press quietly fucking wrote an article that didn't get a lot of coverage in mainstream media about how, like, okay, well, all the concentration camps have been closed now. Like, all the re-education camps are closed now in fucking Xinjiang, and it's like very different vibes in Xinjiang. And now, it's the tourism hour.
Let's see what the Associated Press actually had to say.
Why is China invading Tibet to end slavery different than the Spanish invading the Aztecs or supporting those groups who existed under Aztec oppression and West African slavery and the British? Yeah, really simple. It's because they fought alongside the Tibetan communists, and then they fucked them over in the process, but they initially fought alongside the Tibetan Maoist movements. That's the difference. That's it. You're also comparing a foreign invasion coming in to the Aztecs thousands of miles away to an autonomous region that was already under Chinese rulership, and the previous Chinese rulership did just simply overlooked the structure of serfdom. They didn't give a shit. They were like, yeah, the Dalai Lamas can do whatever they want. They want to fucking chop an ear off? That's great. That is the real problem here, because it's not like Tibet was not under a autonomous part of China. It was an autonomous region that was still under Chinese rulership. It's just that the previous Chinese empires did not care about what the fuck they were doing to the Tibetan serfs, to the Tibetan peasant class. And also on top of that, even the Nationalist Party did not care about that same exact landlord slash feudal serfdom structure that existed in Tibet. That's a major difference, don't you think? That's a major historical difference. Having said that, however, I think that there are still many issues in terms of not giving enough autonomy to Tibet or not cherishing certain aspects of Tibetan culture, Tibetan language. This is a real problem in China. This is a real issue in China, okay? And then there's the second side of this, in terms of the historical, reference point, because you're failing to understand my point here. You said the Spanish fought alongside the anti-Aztec local fighters. It was the majority of the fighters. Tibet was loosely under Chinese rulership, but never Sinicized. I know. I'm not saying that the Sinicization of Tibet is the appropriate measure. I'm saying it's actually the part that I'm critical of is precisely that. But what you fail to comprehend here is that what came in the aftermath of this was not a reassertion of the same serfdom structure. They didn't do that. They didn't just go back to the land rulership structure in Tibet, but now with Chinese ownership. Do you see what I mean? And also the relationship between Tibet and Chinese sovereignty is, of course, entirely different than the relationship between colonial Spanish occupation over the Aztecs. There is not hundreds of years of being under Chinese rulership despite having autonomy. And also what happened to the aftermath of that is important, don't you think? There wasn't slavery of the Tibetan masses conducted by the Communist Party of China. Anyway, Hasan, I can see the fear in your eyes. Maybe we should call it on the content, Nuke. That's so funny. All of these people that have been begging for me to watch this are now finally coming in to be like, you shouldn't watch this, actually. I feel like you're afraid. Yeah. Anyway, let's keep going. Yeah, I'm still being a coward.
To say about this. These are all AP articles from the last 2 years.
It's also ignoring that Spain practiced slavery in Mexico. Like it would be the same if China. It would be the same if, yes, China went in, okay, no collaboration whatsoever, no demands whatsoever from Tibetan Maoists and Tibetan communists that wanted to rid themselves of the antiquated practice of serfdom that was incredibly, incredibly violent, incredibly brutal, okay? And instead, instead just reformed that exact same societal structure and continued to enslave Tibetans. But that's not what happened. So obviously, you know, there is a major difference here. This doesn't mean that there is any sort of, this doesn't mean that like it's great. I'm not saying that it is, okay? I'm simply offering some nuance to the way that people frame these conversations as black and white and try to make make it work within the imperialist structure in the same way that, like, you understand Spanish colonialization. Okay?
Press actually had to say about this. These are all AP articles from the last 2 years. UK independent body reports China committed genocide in Xinjiang. China sanctioned a U.S. research firm and 2 individuals over a report about the human rights violations in Xinjiang.
It's the tourism hour.
To China's fury, UN accuses Beijing.
Okay, he pulls up a lot of these AP articles, and I feel like from all of the clips that I've seen on the Context Nuke, he basically does not go into great detail about these articles at all. I don't think he's read any of these articles at all. Many of these articles are basically from National Endowment of Democracy funded groups like NGOs that are playing a significant role here, okay? Having said that, is there veracity to some of these claims? Absolutely, okay? Some of the claims that he's highlighting in the headlines is actually correct. The problem is, and I don't know what when these articles are from or what these articles are actually featuring, but I would go so far as to suspect that he's making it seem as though the article that I was referencing, the article that I was reading, as a matter of fact, in terms of China's re-education and cultural erasure has ended, and that Xinjiang has now become a tourism destination. He claims that article does not exist, except here is the article. So while he was actually looking for all of these different article headlines that he could draw from, what happened? Did he just simply fail to find terror and tourism? Xinjiang eases its grip, but fear remains. This is the Associated Press article that I was actually reading and referencing to Ethan Klein in that conversation. Xinjiang, China, the razor wire that once ringed public buildings in China's far northwestern Xinjiang region is nearly all gone. Gone too are the middle school uniforms and military camouflage and the armored personnel carriers rumbling around the homeland of the Uyghurs. Gone are many of the surveillance cameras that once glared down like birds from overhead poles and the eerie eternal wail of sirens in the ancient Silk Road city of Kashgar. This right here is basically the summarization of like my summarization of the story is this article saying that they ended their operations They ended their operations. And the clips that, and here's why I say he's fucking devoid of context. This is the reason why I call this the context nuke. The reason why I call this the context nuke is because he rips these clips, which I don't even know where he sourced them from, okay? Because I don't think he sourced them himself. I think someone gave him these clips. Because if he were to actually, if he actually cared about understanding the nuance of this position that I'm presenting, he would recognize that some of the clips that he pulled out are literally directly from me covering this article. Here it is, October 13, 2021, Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Gone too are the middle school uniforms and military camouflage and the armored personnel carriers rumbling around the homeland of the Uyghurs. Gone are the many of the surveillance cameras that once glared down like birds from overhead poles and the eerie eternal wail of sirens in the ancient Silk Road city of Kashgar. Uyghur teenage boys, once a rare sight, now flirt with girls over pounding dance music at rollerblading rinks. One cab driver blasted Shakira as she raced through the streets. 4 years after Beijing launched a brutal crackdown that swept up 1 million or more Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim minorities into detention camps and prisons, its control of Xinjiang has entered a new era. Chinese authorities have scaled back many of the most draconian and invisible aspects of the region's high-tech police state. The panic that gripped the region a few years ago has subsided considerably, and a sense of normality is creeping back in. It's because he purposely limited the search to 2 years, so his article was left out intentionally. Now, time and time again, I have actually railed against, as much as people say I'm a China glazer, which I am a China glazer, let's be real. Time and time again, I've actually brought up the unjustifiable practice of mass detention and mass surveillance and dragnets that were cast upon the Uyghur Muslim population in Xinjiang. I do not think it's appropriate, and I do not think it's acceptable. And I have made that very clear over and over again. I've actually made fun of the people that are so invested in defending China that they come in here and sometimes act like hogs, but for China, and say the exact same things that hogs say about Muslims and Muslim detention or immigrant detention in the United States of America, but this time for China. This is an age-old bit that I do all the fucking time. But if you were actually interested in the nuance or my actual perspective on this, you could have probably figured it out by, I don't know, doing a cursory analysis, just fucking Googling it, you know? He admitted on a stream that he got these clips from someone, but because I'm not insane, I don't have the clip of him saying it on me. Having said that, going back to, if you Google search Xinjiang Associated Press, that's the first article that comes up. Terror and tourism, Xinjiang eases grips, but fear remains. Now, there's some other articles that he's also sourced here, which I suspect he probably didn't look at. And I think it's important to understand the timeline here on what he's talking about, because he's trying to make it seem as though he's basically pulling articles from after our conversation to imply that that I was lying, that the Xinjiang detention had not ended. He's also implying that I'm actually in favor of this detention. I am not. I'm in favor of the truth. Okay? So when I actually retaliate and say, no, those are not death camps, those are not like, there's no like organ harvesting operation that's taking place, I'm simply combating against misinformation. This is what I do. This is my primary purpose. Okay? In a lot of circumstances, it's usually right-wing misinformation. You guys love it when I do it to Joe Rogan, but you seemingly don't like it if I'm doing it to a liberal position. Okay?
Uyghur County in China has the highest prison rate in the world. 1 in 25 people is in a Chinese prison.
It's the tourism hour.
48 Uyghurs detained in Thailand for almost 11 years are on hunger strike to protest their imminent deportation to China, where they face imprisonment or execution.
Not only does this AP article seem not to exist, reading the AP proved exactly the opposite.
So, again, he claims that this AP article does not exist. It obviously exists. So, what the fuck are you talking about? Here is the AP article. Here's a video of me reading the AP article. Why would you even put this in the video? What kind of research have you done? Also, none of this even proves your point, which was that you watched a documentary that I suspected was like a Shenyang or Falun Gong documentary that said that there were death camps in China. None of what he has shown so far has said that there are death camps in China. Part of the reason why I don't think that he was able to prove his perspective in the conversation at all is because they weren't fucking death camps, and I was right. They were re-education camps. And I've never said that that was appropriate or permissible or acceptable. I've always been against that. This is the problem. And people will say, Hasan, we got you. You said you would be in favor of re-education. There's a difference between re-educating people who have done crimes in the process of rehabilitation, okay, versus doing dragnets against an entire minority population and mass surveillance against an entire minority population. That is what I'm against. I am in favor of re-education and rehabilitation for those who have actually done severe crimes. I think that that is an infinitely better way to deal with that than to just fucking execute them or to imprison them like we do in the United States of America. This is a consistent position that I have maintained throughout my entire fucking political commentary career. This is part of the reason why I'm also endlessly charitable to people who have done thought crimes, who have been reactionary from time to time, because I believe that we are, subject to social conditioning. Okay? Now, it doesn't make any sense, but I'll just start out by saying we're 8 minutes in and his research is not so great. He doesn't prove his point at all. He brings up all of these other articles that have come out after this conversation in an effort to imply that my article actually did not exist at all and that these things are still happening. But I'm willing to bet that if we were to look at these articles, even if they came after our conversation, we would find out that the articles itself were talking about what China was doing before they ended the mass detention structure that they had. This is a UK independent body. China committed genocide in Xinjiang. An independent, unofficial body set up by a prominent British barrister to assess the evidence on China's alleged rights abuses against the Uyghur genocide concluded Thursday the Chinese government committed genocide and crimes against humanity. This is the only article that says that China did a genocide. Okay? The Uyghur Tribunal, made up of lawyers, academics, and business people, doesn't have any government backing or powers to sanction or punish China, but organizers hope the process of publicly laying out evidence will compel international action to tackle Beijing's policies against the Uyghurs, a largely Muslim ethnic group. Tribunal Chair Jeffrey Nice said the genocide ruling was based on evidence that the Chinese government's forced birth control and sterilization policies targeting Uyghurs in the far western Xinjiang province were intended to destroy a significant part of the group's population. The abuse was part of the comprehensive policies directly linked to President Xi Jinping and the highest levels of Chinese government, it said. Now, this is not a real court. This is not the ICC. This is not the ICJ. This is simply, it's not even a people's tribunal, which does happen, okay? Brace, friend of the show, Brace Belden, YPJ terrorist, Brace Belden, has actually participated in a people's tribunal, I believe, against the former Duterte leadership. I think it was the Duterte leadership, if I'm not mistaken. There has to be an intention to destroy the act of interfering with the birth of a group. About 30 witnesses and experts gave evidence to a series of public hearings in central London this year, alleging torture, forced abortions, rape, beatings by authorities while in state detention centers. The tribunal concluded that it was beyond the doubt that the crimes against humanity were committed. Nice said she and other senior officials bear primary responsibility for what has occurred in Xinjiang. Once again, I don't see the organ harvesting or the execution camps that Ethan was talking about here. This is still unacceptable, okay? Completely unacceptable and not a part of, considering that I don't actually agree with the Chinese detention structure that exists in Xinjiang, this is not even against my position. My position was literally that Ethan is wrong about Chinese death camps, okay? Chinese death camps and forced organ harvesting. These were fabulous claims being made. Okay? Why did you skip over the Chinese embassy statement? Tanky propagandist. The tribunal and its so-called conclusions are merely clumsy and shows staged by anti-China elements for their self-entertainment. Anyone with conscience and reason will not be deceived or fooled. Yeah, the Chinese government, if I was pro-China, I will give you what the pro-China position is, okay? The pro-China position is that these separatist elements These separatist elements in Xinjiang are radical Islamist fundamentalists that were propped up by the CIA, and there is a little bit of truth to that as well, but that doesn't matter, okay? Because it doesn't matter in the way that they dealt with this issue, okay? The Chinese Uyghur separatist terrorists were actually doing slaughter, mass slaughter, doing unimaginable amounts of terrorist attacks all over China, and certainly in Xinjiang as well. So that's the reason why they had to do roundups and very targeted roundups and create vocational schools where these guys were simply getting educated for vocational training. That's not my position at all. As a matter of fact, I've argued against that position quite frequently, okay? That is a lie. That is an exaggeration by a state that makes it seem as though their completely warrantless and unjustifiable detention structure was actually simply justifiable and was working towards rehabilitation. I don't agree with that position. I think that's a classic moment where a state lies, right? The Chinese state also has the capacity to lie. They're not infallible. There are plenty of issues with the Chinese state. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm defending the Chinese practice of mass detention anyway. And ironically enough, the article that we were talking about here, also features this. To China's fury, UN accuses Beijing of Uyghur rights abuses. Remember, Ethan actually posted this as an own. In that fucking same article that he posted, if he had actually read that article, he would see this part where it says Beijing has closed many of the camps, which are called vocational training and education centers, but hundreds of thousands of people continue to languish in prison, many in vague secret charges. The report called on China to release all individuals arbitrarily detained to clarify the whereabouts of those who have disappeared and whose families are seeking information about them. There's never been a moment where I did not claim that there weren't serious human rights violations in the Xinjiang region, just like UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez believes the assessment clearly identifies serious human rights violations in the Xinjiang region. I agree that there were serious human rights violations in the Xinjiang region. There's never been a moment where I've actually defended the serious human rights violations in the Xinjiang region. So why did Ethan, one, do a horrible job? Why did he do a horrible job of not reading his own fucking articles that he posted in here? Okay? This is, and yes, you are right, KO Fishy. This is exactly like when I denied or went after atrocity propaganda in the aftermath of October 7. There was plenty of real atrocities that took place on October 7, but Israel greatly increased the intensity of atrocity propaganda in an effort to justify its genocidal ambitions that came immediately after October 7. What did they do in the process? They lied about 40 beheaded babies being lit on fire with kerosene, and numerous other issues. And I was very critical of that propaganda because there was plenty of real atrocities that they could point to, but they wanted to make it seem like there was so much more. And that didn't mean that I was actually defending the actions that took place on October 7, but you would obviously believe that if you're a fucking moron, or if you are trying to present a very different reality, a reality where you want to fit me into an unnuanced perspective. Now, what's ironic here is twofold. One, my mother's maiden name is Uyghur, okay? Uyghurs are Turks. They are Turkic, not the whole, like, the whole world is Turk memes. I'm saying, like, literally, they are a Turkic people, okay? Not only that, which is why I also jokingly say I'm white Chinese, okay? But not only that, but also the Turkish government does actually train them. The Turkish government does actually train a lot of Uyghur fighters and uses them alongside the Salafist brigades that they've trained in Syria. This is real, and they do this under the watchful eye of the United States of America. This is also real. I am very familiar with the Uyghur separatist groups for this region, okay? If I can't correct misinformation with my podcast co-host without getting called a propagandist for China, then what the fuck am I supposed to do? Just let it happen? Just let him just say this? Let him say whatever the fuck he wants? It's ridiculous. And he did this exact same thing. He did this exact same thing when I corrected his dangerous misinformation that's going to come later, where he talks about Hezbollah and the 500,000 casualties in the Syrian civil war. We'll get to that later, though.
About the human rights violations in Xinjiang.
It's the tourism hour.
To China's fury, UN accuses Beijing of Uyghur rights abuses.
Tourism hour.
Uyghur County in China has the highest prison rate in the world. 1 in 25 people is in a Chinese prison.
It's the tourism hour.
48 Uyghurs detained in Thailand.
Right, we watched all this. Reading on this and has regurgitated it to his mainstream audience. Why is he defending China?
I wasn't, and I never have. And you're wrong for claiming that I have. Your entire premise here is that they had death camps. You did not prove that. That there was organ harvesting. You didn't prove that either. And then you turned around and said, I'm defending China. I never did. I never defended China. Not in any of these conversations. Describing the actual horrifying conditions while also saying that they're horrifying conditions and completely unacceptable is not defending China. It's only defending China if you have a Steven Crowder style approach to fucking global conflict, where you're like, wait a minute, you're offering some nuance while also still criticizing the Chinese government? You must be defending China.
China's genocide of their Muslim population. How does this even make sense? It only makes
sense. He still hasn't fucking, offered additional claims to this genocide. Now, what's really interesting about this is... And I have to talk about my second position here. There is one thing that I have maintained throughout this entire process. And that is that while Ethan on the one hand talks about how China is genociding the Uyghur Muslims, his position on Israel genociding the Palestinians always goes back and forth. He has sometimes called it a war and sometimes offered concessions to why it truly is a genocide. Okay? So it's very hard to pin him on this position. So you have to focus on what he actually is doing whenever he talks about Israel. What kind of defenses he's engaging with respect to Israel. Is he actually offering nuance to Israel's military actions, or is he simply running defense for Israel's military actions? Okay? Because I did not defend the Chinese government's mass detention facilities. I've called it a cultural genocide before, as a matter of fact, over and over again. Now, one thing that I have to make clear here, and this is another thing that I have talked about over and over and over again. If Israel treated the Palestinian population in the same unjustifiable manner that China treated Xinjiang, Israel would get a Nobel Peace Prize every year going forward. Every Western nation would turn around and cherish how wonderful and how peaceful of a nation state Israel actually is for taming the savage, barbaric Palestinians. They would talk about how incredible Israel is for actually simply doing mass detention and mass surveillance upon the captive Palestinian population and not slaughtering them. If Israel started to do China-style mass surveillance and mass detention tomorrow on all Palestinians, both in the West Bank and also in Gaza, literally every American would be doing tricks on it. They would talk about Benjamin Netanyahu being the most peaceful person on the planet. Okay? So think about what it takes for people to say China is doing death camps and has an exterminationist principle and doing organ harvesting, as opposed to how much it takes for people to even come to terms with the genocide that Israel is committing. China never bombed entire city blocks. China never shut off humanitarian aid. As a matter of fact, one of the most ironic statements throughout this entire fucking process was the fact that China was also still committed to developing Xinjiang as it is everywhere else, including in Tibet as well. But the American perspective on this has always been they are trying to develop these areas to continue destroying them, to continue killing them. There was literally an Associated Press article that I read talking about a high-speed rail line going all the way to Xinjiang, basically creating this massive network of high-speed rail that was seen as a negative, that was portrayed as a negative thing. people in Xinjiang still have freedom to travel in that regard, okay? Under the hukou system, which needs desperate reform, there are obviously limitations to travel and how much you can, internally travel inside of China. But many of these people that are criticizing me don't even know what the fuck that is anyway. And they're now going to Google it and be like, Hasan didn't bring this up, or talk about the severity of the structure, okay? Whew. We are at $71,000. I'm going to obviously increase the. I'm going to obviously increase the Tiltify donos. Hold on. Where the frick? How do I get to my account? My hub campaigns. Hold on. How do I change the goal? Is it not allowed? Can I not change the goal after the campaign actually? Oh, here, I'm changing it. I'm doubling it. Double or nothing, baby. Boom. We're only 8 minutes and 32 seconds into the video, and we've already fundraised $72,000. Are you still giving money so you will stop this torture? What? Okay. You've gained me from H3 high new father. So one must ask the question, why Ethan Klein refuses to actually engage in any of the things that I'm saying, uses out of context clips, and also simultaneously has a very different standard for what China's doing as opposed to what Israel is doing. Okay? What the fuck's going on here? It doesn't make any sense. I'm actually morally consistent on this process. He's the one who's not. Now, isn't Israel's activity in between lawn mowings essentially what China does in its worst moments? Exactly. That's why I brought that up. If China did what Israel did to Xinjiang, we would nuke China. Okay? Understand something. If China did what Israel did to the Palestinians in Xinjiang, we would nuke China tomorrow. And if Israel did what China did in Xinjiang as a part of its rehabilitation or re-education vocational training campaign or whatever the fuck the Chinese government calls it, they would consider that to be a pathway towards infinite peace. Can you imagine where Palestinians will now have freedom of travel into other parts of Israel, into greater Israel, mass detention and the subsequent re-education inside of these supposed vocational training schools or whatever. But then in the aftermath of that, they have full-blown citizenship and access to the same fucking resources. That would never happen in a million years. Netanyahu would get a Nobel Peace Prize. Netanyahu would get every single Nobel Peace Prize for the rest of time. Also, speaking of, organ harvesting, I mean, that's, but that's besides the point.
Sense if A, he's being paid, or B, he has the political complexities of a 5-year-old. I know America Bad is a meme that people laugh at online, but with Hasan, this does actually seem to be the beginning and the end of his analysis.
2 principles. Let me explain to you. 2 principles that you should keep with you. Yeah, so this is a classic. This is something that I hear mostly from Sex Pestany and his orbiters. But the idea that, my commentary on political matters is simply reduced to America Bad is incredibly, incredibly dumb. It's ironic that this is yet another case of pure projection where Ethan is saying, oh, his commentary is just literally America Bad. At no point, if I simply stated America Bad over and over and over again, how the fuck would I fill 8 hours of space every goddamn day? Why is it that these people never actually make the argument America good? Why is it that these people never actually dive deeper into why I say America bad, for example? And this is, once again, obviously a reductive clip out of context where I'm describing a complex position. Let's take a look. coming from a person who's Turkish, okay? When you look at a situation in the Middle East, you look at what the local government is and who the Western forces are. Never align with the Western forces. So when I look at other countries, I look at the regional actor, whoever the regional power player is, and then I look at who is backed by the Western superpowers. That's a principle that you could take home with you if you want to actually be moral or if you want to be smart about the way.
As I've said before, time and time again, okay, from both my own personal experiences and I'm Turkish, okay? Turkey is a NATO nation. Turkey is the way that it is specifically